Hi everyone. I'm adjusting the camera, just getting ready. Looking forward to seeing everybody tonight. It's our Wednesday night live and I have a wonderful topic for you tonight. So I'm waiting for everyone to get told about that we're here. We'll just cruise the camera a little more and it'll be wonderful. So we're gonna talk about the seasons of our lives, and part of how this came up. Let me tell you about my day. Today was a day that I got to really work on what are going to be topics that are going to be coming up and giving you the opportunity to learn a lot about not only pregnancy and birth and newborns, but the preparation. But I'm also going to add in some mindful lifestyles. So I'm excited about that. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And I was with, I'm actually going to move this camera over just a tad bit. I was with one of my videographers this week that as we're getting ready to make the online education series, and he asked me a couple of questions. Hi, Martine. He asked me a couple of questions this week, and it had to do with kind of the seasons of our lives. And I thought, you know, I gave a talk at a mother's group a few years ago about the seasons of our lives, and I think it's a really wonderful topic to want to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of dive into it. The other thing I'm playing with here a little bit is timing, is finding out what is the best time for me to do the lives. We've kind of started out at 6, I moved them to 6:30, 6:45, we're now at 7, and I just want to make it so that it's workable for everyone. I also love mornings, so if you have any comments about some things like that, please pass it along. So the seasons of our lives. I want to take nature, since nature is always one of my themes anyway, and let's talk about what nature does. Nature gives us seasons, right? And those seasons are winter and spring and summer and fall. And when nature goes through each one of her seasons, there's a purpose and there's a progression that happens. So let's take and let's look at the seasons starting with winter. And when you look at winter, and this winter, we have had a lot of winter to look at here in the Sacramento area and the adjoining areas where we've had a tremendous amount of snow at lower elevations than we're used to. So let's look at winter. Winter's a time that animals hibernate, that we tend to want to stay in our jammies a little longer, that we are inside more, and we tend to wear more clothing, and we maybe don't go out and do as many activities. Now, there's exceptions to those rules. Perhaps if you live in Hawaii, maybe you do more in the wintertime, but in the generalities, we tend to hunker down more in the wintertime. So it's a time that maybe we read books or we're thinking about things. And when we think about that winter time and our creative process and the things we think about, what happens next? Well, in nature then begins to take, as it's been resting, right? It's been resting and hunkering in. It takes and it begins to start doing what? What does nature do? It starts putting these little buds on the trees, right? On the trees, and there's little things that start popping up out of the dirt, and we start beginning to see just a hint, just a tiny little seed that wants to make its way up, that wants to say, hello, I'm here now, right? And that's what happens as winter just barely starts to move into what's getting ready for springtime, but it isn't in full bloom yet, right? And so we go from this winter time of being inside, and if you imagine for a moment that inside is that concept. Maybe we're thinking about a new idea we want to create a new project, or we're thinking about maybe we'd like to have another baby, or maybe we're thinking about making a change or a transition in life, right? So as we do that, it's kind of inside, we're kind of thinking, we're kind of hunkering in, and then what happens when spring comes? Spring begins to pop out, and it pops out small, and then everything gets bigger and more blossoms, and the trees begin to bloom their leaves, and the little plants begin to grow the things, the flowers begin to come out, and it begins to say, I'm here. The world wants to share with us about its nature again. So when we equate that to having our childbearing year times, it is that we begin to become in the season of spring. And so I like to think of spring as the time in your lives where you're getting pregnant, your belly's nice and growing, where you're coming out and you're being seen, and the baby's coming out and being seen from being in that time when everything was hunkered in. And that springtime is the spring of your life. When you're having babies or hoping to have your babies, it's also the time when you're giving birth to those newness and concepts and ideas, as well as to a baby. You're giving birth, and then you go to nursing your babies, and you're having those early weeks, right? Those early weeks that are there, the early weeks, the early months, the early years of childbearing. So let's look at spring as that wonderful time that allows you to be able to open those projects, creative projects, but let's talk about it in having children. That springtime is where you're doing all of that, okay? And many times with families, whether it's your first baby, you're coming into it, and it's a brand new thing of how that spring is going to grow and how it's going to progress. If you're having more babies, then you come into spring, and you're growing and you're expanding your family, you're expanding your heart, you're going through the changing from that quiet time of winter or quiet time before you had children into a time where you're now with your children and nursing and up and doing these young baby things with your family, and that it grows and grows. And so then where do we go from spring? Spring comes in from all of its colors, all of its growth and progression, and it then moves into summer. And summer comes with fun and activities, and we go places and we go on vacation, and we become very animated in our life and the things that we do. So when we equate it to childbearing is where the spring is when we're in that bearing and breastfeeding in those young babies, and then we get to move into summer, where we get to do more adventures with them and watch them grow and encourage them and teach them and progress in helping them learn how to become individuals that grow up into who they are, because we know that each one is different, right? So summer is our time of really being able to nurture and teach and provide opportunities and work, right? Work like we would in a garden, or we work outside more. We take all that springtime that we sort of planted, and now we work with it, and then we harvest, right? So our families change, and sometimes when we've had a few babies and we're not sure if we're going to have any more babies, sometimes it feels a little funny to be between that spring and summertime. And what I've noticed is that when you begin to become moving past, or you haven't decided whether you want to have another baby or not, nature by itself, there's something, an internal clock that goes on that I watch with women and birth givers, that their internal clock, about every 18 months to 2 years, nature will begin to want to have another baby. And that 18 months to 2 years will continue that psychological, that mental, that emotional, that physical. And I think, why does that happen in women, in birth givers, that about that often they begin to want another baby? Probably because that 18-month to 2-year-old is now not wanting to sit on your lap, doesn't want to cuddle as much. They're up running around. They're discovering the world. And they're starting to learn talking. And so our role begins to change a little bit. So we start thinking about, well, having another baby would be a good idea, which many start a few months before that, thinking I want a baby when my child's about 18 months to 2 years old. So when you begin to start noticing, I've had the children that I feel like I want to have. It's not that I don't want to have anymore, it's that I'm not sure I want to raise anymore. I feel comfortable, whether that's 1, 2, hopefully not 1. I was an only. Always have 2, okay? Always have a playmate and somebody they can relate with. Whether that's 2 or 3 or 4, or some of our families have 7, 8, and 9. We've had one family that had 10, and there's others that have more. And so when they are figuring out how many children they want to have, eventually there becomes, whether you've had 2 or 3 or 4, there becomes a time when you say, I feel like this is all the children that I want to raise, but I feel this thing inside me that feels sad and maybe grieving that I'm not going to get pregnant again, and I'm not going to have the birth. Maybe it's something that you look forward to the pregnancy, and some women, birth givers, don't like pregnancy, but they really look forward to the birth. Or maybe it's just getting the babies here and enjoying the newborn, or breastfeeding, or raising them in those first few years. Whatever it is that brings you that joy, there is a time when you start to wonder, how do I go from not being in that place anymore to what comes next? And we all have friends and family that go through that. And so I think as we begin to embrace that it's normal when we are in springtime to blossom in that belly and to blossom and grow this baby for the first few years and begin to get them up on their feet and more independent. And then when we take that family and we begin to move into the summer time, where it's the teaching and the encouragement and the helping them raise to who they are as individuals, we then move, after those children become older, into fall years. And many of you may see that in your parents or grandparents, depending on how old you are. And some of you may have gone through that yourself. I don't know everybody who's on. And the fall time is what? The leaves start to change. Everything goes into a vibrant color again. And it begins to start saying we're getting ready for a rest. So as your children grow up and you begin to send them out, the fall time is the time when you see what go on in nature. Nature begins to want to rest, right? And so it makes these beautiful, vibrant trees into yellows and oranges and these sort of crimson, red, orange, and it begins to want to drop leaves. And then what does nature also do? Nature comes in with these big waves, and it shakes the trees in order to drop the leaves. And then it rains, and it mulches all the leaves, and the leaves go in and they nourish the ground, and then they shake the leaves again, and eventually everything falls off the trees, and the rain comes and it nourishes the ground, and the leaves create their mulch, and nature goes into hibernation so that it can refuel again, right? Refuel again, and be able to get ready for winter. And winter is a time in the seasons of life where people rest more. They rest from the labors of raising children and getting them out to resting, reflecting, being able to read books, have a little more time to themselves, and the mind starts to work that says, what am I going to do with my time? And then what happens with winter? Spring comes again. And those ideas and those creative juices start springing forth something new. So in the seasons of our life, that's how things progress. For me, this is how I have seen nature teach us about that progression. And in the childbearing years, you can think about that time where spring is when you're pregnant, you give birth, you're nourishing and you're breastfeeding your baby. Summer is that time when they're starting to become more independent and you're teaching and guiding and educating them. And then fall is that time where you begin to let go a little bit and you begin to realize that they're getting more independent and you're kind of missing some of those years. And you think in wintertime again, maybe we'll have another baby. And then that concept is a conception that spring comes again. So do you see how the cycles of our lives match what nature does? Nature is so wise. It knows to do that. And sometimes we have had women, birth givers, who have had a few babies. And usually it's after that third, fourth, or fifth. And we say to them, you need to replenish your garden, right? So when you look at your garden, if you plant a garden in spring, and you then start getting some of the rewards from it, and you harvest it through the summer and maybe sometimes into the fall, depending on what you're doing with that. There comes a time when the soil starts getting a little depleted. And so we either let it rest for a season so that it can regroup, or we add things like compost and good things to fertilize it to help the soil want to be able to grow the new things that we put into it. So let's think about that as we are, as you are, I'm out of childbearing years, as you are in childbearing years, or family or friends that you know who are, that sometimes they need to replenish their garden. So we think about preparation of pregnancy the same way that nature does. Nature says, let's replenish it. Let's put greens and lots of fruits and vegetables and proteins. Let's make sure we have lots of folate, so we have good cell division. We have lots of organic foods in every way that you can. And we are able to really replenish that garden as we get ready to conceive again and have another baby, especially if you've had a few, because each baby goes in and is taking all those nutrients, and when you're nursing. The other thing is lots of iron, so that because when you're pregnant and when you nurse, you give out a lot of iron. So you need to replenish that in your body. So if you're having more than your first or second or maybe even your third, think about replenishing that garden so that the garden wants to grow. Nature does the very same thing every year, and every few years it says, I'm going to quiet down. Our fruit trees, we have fruit trees on our property, and our fruit trees, we have a plum, we planted some out in the back. They aren't yielding too well yet. But anyway, we have lots of fruit trees, and we watch them periodically go into only giving us a little bit of fruit, and then replenishing, and then giving us a lot of fruit for several years, and then going into a dormant state. Again, nature is so wise. It knows to do this. So I want to encourage you, if you're planning on getting pregnant, or if you're pregnant now, nourish the garden, okay? Nourish the garden. Get lots of greens, lots of colorful foods. The summer is coming up. The planting is going on. Nourish that garden, so that when the springtime comes, you can be ready to grow the garden, birth the baby, nurse the baby, and be ready for summer, which is in raising the children and ready to be able to go through the fall time of letting go and watching them go into their adulthood, and then the winter time being able to come into who you are even more. So some of you just joined, so I was talking about the seasons of our lives and knowing that each season has a purpose, and each season is part of the childbearing cycle. It's also part of the cycle of our lives. It's part of what nature keeps teaching us, is that if we trust in nature, nature does a great job. Sometimes there are outside things that can alter what nature is doing. That we know, right? And when that occurs, we take it into what we need to do to help work with nature, to help nature do its job. So when you're thinking about wanting to look, I had a thought which I hadn't really pondered about, but as I was talking about fall and how the leaves come down and how it nourishes the ground and the rain and it replenishes everything, you know, a little thought came to me about the placentas. Now, there's a lot of people that do placenta encapsulation services and a lot of families who choose to ingest their placentas now. And I thought, wow, you know, if we take that to nature also, and we think about how nature works with itself, that it decomposes those things and feeds the earth again, the placenta kind of does the same thing, not only just for the nourishment of your body and the baby during that first 6 weeks, but it actually probably replenishes a lot of maybe what you've given out to the baby and through nursing. So hadn't really coordinated those thoughts yet, but I think those are good thoughts to coordinate, because nature likes to be able to regenerate itself really well. And what it needs is good food, right? Good food, good water, and be able, right on, and be able to do that. So when you think about the one thing that you feel is important to do in preparation for pregnancy, what is the one thing that you like most to make sure you do getting ready for pregnancy? So feed me off some lines and let me read them off. I know I will always recommend methylfolate. That one, of course, is on my 40 P's of pregnancy, which I'll give a little shout out for at the moment. The 40 P's of pregnancy, if you go on, you go on my Instagram page, my bio page, click the the link. It'll give you 40 videos of going from preparation to pregnancy to visits. Good job. Keep them coming in, you guys. To visits with your care providers, to how your pelvis works, how breastfeeding works, postpartum, and etc. Okay? So please send people over there. Let them know that they're there. They're free. After they get the first 5, they'll give them an option if they want all of the access immediately for $27. If they don't want it access immediately, then they can just have it once a day for free. Okay, so you've given me diet, right? Anjali, I want you to be more specific with me. What in the diet do you think is important? Lots of greens. Yes, greens have magnesium, protein, some iron. They have lots of trace minerals. Really good to get lots of your greens in. Starting your prenatals beforehand. Yes, why? Because they fill in those little teeny gaps, right? They're not a substitute for nutrition, but they are a way of making sure you get those little teeny raw nutrients that we know has to be there for a growing baby. And yes, folate and the mindset. Thank you, Jennifer. And protein. Protein, I cannot even stress that enough, okay? Protein is where it's at, you guys. Not only before, during, After, you've got to have protein. And if you have a vegetarian diet, you need to really look at making sure that you're getting adequate amounts of protein, because your protein is what is your building blocks, right? And my 40 Ps, the second video, number 39, is all about protein. Remember, these are short tips. These videos are only a couple of minutes long. But being able, so I just asked everybody, those of you who just joined me, what do you feel is one of the most important things you do to get ready to be pregnant, or you would tell someone else who was planning to get pregnant? What would it be? So feed those on to me. So your diet, nature is the same way. It wants water, right? So we need lots of fluids, water, and good fluids, right? Not your sodas, not your sugar drinks, but good fluids. Coconut water, nourishing teas, good clean water. And clean water means that there's not a lot of chemicals and chlorines and things like that, which mostly come out of your tap most of the time, right? So I'm really encouraging you to get filtered water, get a filter on your water at home, whatever it takes, even if it's just a Brita pitcher. Filter your water. That's really important. Get your protein in. Nature puts things into its environment in order to grow well, right? All right, another comment is a birth plan. Yes, thank you for that, Jennifer. So having a birth plan, you know, most people don't think about having a birth plan until they get like 6 or 8 weeks from birth. What would it be like if you made a birth plan when you got pregnant, or as soon as you stopped feeling sick, when you were beginning pregnancy, that you started making a birth plan? Or do it before you get pregnant? Because the birth plan, that's a great comment, Jennifer. The birth plan is going to outline the things that are important to you, which is going to help you know who you might want as a care provider and where you want to give birth. That's a really important thing to do. All right, so bringing this to nature, remembering where we started, which was the seasons of our lives, and that nature teaches us how to appreciate our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our spirits, and it teaches us to be able to know how to honor the stages of our lives, as well as how to help us prepare to have healthy pregnancies, healthy, happy births, healthy babies, and a great postpartum. So when you go out and you start walking in nature, take a moment to really look around and digest what it's teaching you. Help it to maybe give you some insight as to how it would go in rebirthing something, right? Not rebirthing, but coming into its next stage of springtime, right? And how it would do that, because it has so much it can teach you. So I've enjoyed this topic tonight. Oh, I'm so sorry. You just got here. You have to go back and watch it, Jessica. I really love your comments, and I really love interacting with you. So I'm going to think about more questions to go for you. Before we go off, does anybody have a couple of questions for me? So I'll give you just a second to maybe ask a couple questions, and we'll see if we can maybe ask. We'll take just a few more minutes to answer those questions. I know, it's always such a question to ask a question. You have questions all day long that you'd like to ask, right? And then when I ask you, it's like somebody says, hey, sing a song, and you think, I can't even remember what songs I know, right? I know, that's crazy. So think about those as you go through the week. Each Wednesday night, barring that I'm not at a birth, I will do a Facebook Live. And maybe we'll start having a few, 5 or 10 minutes at the end. Oh, good, thank you. That we can do a question and answer time. So jot those down in your phone or on a piece of paper, or put it up on the fridge or something and say, this is one of those questions I'd like to ask Kaleem on Wednesday night when she's on live, okay? The other thing I want you to help me know is the time. I want to make it really available to all of you. I know you're putting kids down. I know you've tried to finish dinner, and I'm not really sure what's the best time. Morning, afternoon, night? You can give me some feedback. So Jennifer asked, what is your favorite thing to tell women in preparation for pregnancy? Well, one, what is a great time? My favorite thing to tell women is, oh, that's a really good question. I have so many things that I love to tell them. I would say it's refueling your garden and having a good mindset. And when you put those two together, you'll go into pregnancy feeling better. And I think when that garden is really fueled, I like to hope that it will carry you through morning sickness a little bit easier, because sometimes morning sickness can pull on all of your resources. So maybe if you fueled them up ahead of time, and I will sometimes tell women to gain 5 pounds before they get pregnant, especially if they're real tiny to begin with. And when they are, then gaining some before they get pregnant sometimes gives them a little bit of reserve to do that. All right, another question. I like her question too. What about women going into their first pregnancy? Thinking about natural childbirth. Oh, love that. So we are so much created to be able to get pregnant most of the time. I realize that sometimes that's not the case for some families, but our bodies are made to be able to get pregnant. That means they're made to be able to give birth. And we listen to a lot of stories and a lot of media and etc. And a lot of what women talk about are fears of the what ifs of so many things. And being afraid to give birth, and you might want to watch one of my other Facebook Lives a few times ago, because I touched on the fact that where did the fear come from, and why is it here? I think actually that was last week. And when we think about being able to give birth for the first time, it's being able to say, you have an opportunity to reprogram your mind to be able to accept that birth is normal, that labor is normal, that giving birth is normal, and it was part of what was put in you before you were ever even born, and it exists in you already. And when you trust that, and you hire care providers that are supportive of that, no one will look at you to want to rescue you from birth. Because birth is not something you need to be rescued from. It is a strong and powerful time in your life, and it will give you tools to be able to do amazing things in your life, as well as being able to raise your child. It's imperative to your progression, provided that everything can go well. I realize sometimes things take a turn, and I understand that, and that's why I continue to teach you how to do as much preventative work so that you don't have to take a turn down a road that could create more medicalization to your birth. So I hope that begins the answer to that. Let's see. Trust your body and what it was made for. Yes. Another one, I've had 2 unmedicated births and am 20 weeks pregnant with my 3rd. I know I can do it again, but I'm still afraid, and I worry about things more this time. You know, you are not alone. The first birth is like the unknown, and we go into it with, will I be able to? Can I do it? I want to trust, and we need a lot of support from our community and our friends to be able to walk that path. and especially no interference in our labor that can take our mind or our bodies away from it. But then when we go into our second one, we either, if we've had an unpleasant first one, we say, I'm afraid that it might be the same way again. And that's where I say to you, each baby has their own story. You have to honor each story. When you come into the third baby, having had 2 unmedicated births, what you come into is you also lump both births and remember all about labor, and now you know what it's like, and you think, can I do that again? And 20 weeks, you're not supposed to do that again right now. And my wonderful midwifery partner, Marlene, I love what she says, don't labor this baby every day. Now, I am one that is a good visualizer, but I like the visualizing after 28 weeks to really be able to take advantage of that time that the whispering is starting in the mind, that the baby will be coming. So what I want to encourage those of you who have had unmedicated births and that fear is there, you're normal. That's not uncommon. In fact, that's more normal than not, is to be able to say, but it still makes me feel a little afraid. And what I would encourage you to do is say to yourself, what is it that makes me fearful? And go ahead and tell me, all of you, what is it that most makes a birth giver fearful about an upcoming birth? Come on, I know what you're going to say, and I want to hear it from you. What are you going to say? Feed it off, because you know what it is. And it's what everybody tells everybody else. Come on. I know you're out there. Well, I'm going to say it. It's usually pain, right? That's what everybody wants to talk about. I'm afraid of the pain. Now, if you're afraid of interventions and the hospital and a birth that didn't go well, that one has to be walked through how it got there and how not to go through that again. If you've had a labor that starts on its own and you either have a home birth or a hospital birth and you walk in and things continue and you have your baby, it's usually pain that everybody wants to say, that's what I'm afraid of. And I want you to begin researching in your mind about the pain and remembering that your body, when you're in labor, is powerful. You can call it pain if you want to, whatever you want to term it as. But when I say to you, you're going to be in pain, it moves you to feeling anxious, worried, and upset. If I say to you, you're going to be powerful and strong, your body's chemicals react differently. So that's part of what needs to be put in there is, oh, there you are. Awesome. Yes, the pain. The pain that I have heard about after you push the baby out. Oh, okay, doctor's pushing meds. Very good. Yes, absolutely. And yes, you're so right. What a wonderful way of thinking about it. So, yes, and what we understand is we also know that the mind has to begin learning. I on my Facebook page, I put a connection to a woman who gave a talk on what happens in the brain. There's an actual place in the brain that we can reprogram how we react to things. And what you have to do is visualize reacting differently. So for those of you that want to understand how, you know, when we look at hypnobirthing, that's what this does. It's reprogramming the brain to accept labor and things in a different way. Oh, I'm so glad. Good. I'm glad that made you feel better. So begin looking at labor, no matter how many babies, as it is a powerful time. We don't labor today, and after 28 weeks, preferably closer to 34, you begin visualizing that you are a powerful, you are strong, that your body is strong and powerful, and that you have everything you need to be able to walk through that path again or for the first time. And when you walk through that path, the other thing I want to remind you, especially those of you who have had babies before, there's a place in us that we sort of go through this mind game. But when labor starts, the oxytocin floods in us. And oxytocin is that love hormone. And it brings a sense of calmness, a sense of peace that you can't 100% get to until you're there with it. Okay? So be able to honor that you've done it twice. You've already done it twice, which means you can do it again. And just as a little tidbit, third babies can be really wonderful. Sometimes they can be really challenging, but they can be really wonderful. And first babies can be magnificent. First babies can teach you just how wonderful you can be. But if you're planning to birth in a hospital, get a doula or hire a midwife to help and support you so that you have that help. If you're going to birth in a birth center at home, you should be able to rely on your midwives to be able to encourage you, because your hormones are going to work differently if you're not bombarded by things on the outside. So one of you said that, yeah, doctors pushing meds on you. So when you go into a hospital system, if that's where your comfort zone is, then you are going into a system that is used to using drugs, tests, and surgery. So you have to be able to prepare yourself, your birth plan, to be able to honor who you are inside yourself. And what I used to tell families when I was a doula, which is somebody who only does emotional support rather than a midwife who does full care, I used to teach them that I want you to learn how to be in your bubble. So when you get ready to go to a hospital, no matter what baby this is for you, I want you to imagine that you're going to put yourself in a beautiful pink or purple bubble. And that bubble is all about that strength and power and that feeling of courage and feeling of awe. And when you get into the car, you just take your bubble with you. That's just part of your journey. And when you get out of the car, it's just part of your journey. When you get into the L&D unit and they want you to change your clothes or whatever, either say yes or no, whatever makes you happy on that. They want you to put on gowns. You don't need to put on gowns, but be in your bubble. And if you need to put earplug phones in to listen to some beautiful music, then do that. And just be in your bubble, because the fact is that you are the one that gives birth to your baby, right? No one else is going to give birth to your baby. No one else is going to contract. No one else is going to push. No one else is going to give birth to your baby, no matter where you give birth, unless it's surgery. And when you think about that and you're in your little bubble, your bubble is where you remember that it doesn't matter what's going on outside of you, no matter what people are doing, what they're talking about, or anything. Birth happens within. And that's where you stay focused. Don't let people pull you out of it. Stay in your bubble. Take a shower as soon as you get monitored if you go to a hospital. If you're having a home birth, your midwives will be gentle and they will be quiet. Birth center, you move yourself to your environment. They should be pretty good about letting you be in your environment and not distracting your mind. When your mind is distracted, then oxytocin can't work to its fullest. And when that happens, there's a conflict that goes on, and that can be very disruptive during labor. So make sure that the bubble goes up. So thank you. The feeling after is amazing. I deliver in hospital for peace of mind, and I definitely get in that bubble. Thank you. Yes, that really helps so much. All right, well, I'm going to close down tonight. I want to just remind you, write down your questions, and we'll do a little question and answer at the end of each Facebook Live. I'm doing them on Wednesday nights, and I'm really grateful for all of you that join me. It just spurs me on, makes my week. I come away feeling so charged up and excited that I'm making a difference. Please take whatever I've said to you, go out, tell others, tell them they can do this, that they are strong and powerful beings, and that nature knows what it's doing. And if we just trust it, it will guide us to producing that beautiful story that you want to produce. Hi, Joe. All right, so my closing is, go in, hug your children, tell them you love them, tell them they're amazing and that they can do anything that they set their minds to, because they are the future generation. And you are making a difference today in their lives and in everybody else's lives when they grow up. All right? Thank you so much. I'll see you next Wednesday. Go over to my P's of Pregnancy, which is really pregnancy all the way through 6 weeks postpartum, on Instagram. I'm putting them into my feeds in Facebook. Share them with people. Yes, they are for free. If for chance you don't want to wait one a day, it's a $27 fee, and I'm using this to help create the online full series. So I'm really excited about it, but they are free. They are my gift to you. So have a good night, and thanks for joining me. See you next week.